Well, hey friends, Catherine and Erica here from Catherine Pooler Designs. Welcome to a Crafty Christmas with Catherine and friends.
And friends. Tonight, our guest is Rebecca Keppel, and we just absolutely adore Rebecca. She does fantastic videos, and she's so enthusiastic.
She's great. Well, I can't wait to see what Rebecca has in store for us, what she's going to teach us about foiling and stamping.
Combining ink blending and foiling? Let's do it.
Please. But before we dive in, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, even before you see it, because I know you're going to love it. And be sure to leave a comment. Our guest instructors have absolutely loved all of the positive feedback you guys have been giving them. Thank you so much for doing so.
Whoa,
hugs and kisses.
Yeah.
And without further ado, let's dive in.
Yay.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Keppel and I'm so excited to be joining the Crafty Christmas with Catherine and Friends series. In this video, I'm going to be sharing just a few of my favorite things. One of my favorite things are the inks from Catherine Pooler Designs. I absolutely adore the colors. I love the brightness. I love how they stamp. I love how they ink blend. I love that they're reactive with water. And now I love that Catherine Pooler Designs has foil plates. So today we're going to combine inks and foils on Christmas cards. First, let me share some of the products that I'll be using today. Up first is the Holiday Delights 6x6 pattern paper pack. You get 3 sheets of each of the 8 designs. I love this pack in particular for the bright colors. These are my favorite colors to work with, and I love them around the holidays. I also really like that they give you the inks that will match from Catherine Pooler Designs ink collection. So here's some of the inks that were on that pattern paper that I'll be using today. I'll also use the stamp set Jar Full of Joy, and I'll be using the matching dies. And you can see that there are dies for everything on that stamp set. I'll also use the Rattan hot foil plate as well as the dotted rectangles hot foil. So I'll use those in conjunction with the inks for these different techniques. And for a little extra shine, the Lapland and Crater Lake sequins. So to start off, I have Cummerbund and I'm ink blending an A2 white cardstock panel. You can use brushes, you can use a foam blender like I'm doing here, but what I really like to do is start light and then build up my color. I tend to be very heavy-handed, so I have to remind myself to start with a very light layer, and then the more ink you add, the more color you add. So you can see right now, I still have some white spaces, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be completely opaque, especially for a wintry or Christmas background. Those white spaces can look like snowy hills and snowy parts of your background. So I'll just continue to go from the sides towards the center. Once I have it pretty much filled out like I want, I just smear a little bit of the same ink color on my glass mat, and then I use just a paintbrush and some spritzes of water to water down the ink a little bit and make it so that I can spritz some or splatter some of the ink onto the inked cardstock. And that just gives another layer of texture and definition and look to that background. So just adding a little bit of interest with that additional color. The other thing that I love to do with these inks is to just smear them on cardstock to make my own colorful cardstock. Now, this ink pad I've used a lot lately, so you can see that I'm definitely having to go over a couple of spots here. If you notice that, that just means your ink pad needs to be re-inked. Usually they are so juicy that all you have to do is smear once or twice and that's it. It covers up the entire cardstock. So I'll be sure to re-ink my ink pad after this part of the video. If you notice that some of the cardstock looks a little darker or lighter, don't worry too much about it. These inks dry really fast, and when they dry, they definitely seem to spread out a little so that everything ends up looking smooth and even in the end. So I just go over this until I'm happy with the layers of color. Again, start light, go heavy as you go, and that will give you the perfect colorful background. This time, instead of spritzing ink, I'm going to spritz water directly on the panel, and that water reactiveness will create little white splatters on that background. Next up, it's time to start foiling. So again, I have the Catherine Pooler background foil plate, which is that rattan, and then the rectangles, which are the dotted rectangles, and foil those little dots. When I like to foil, I like to tape my panel or whatever I'm foiling down to my foil. So I have the color side facing out, the silver side facing my colored panel, and I'll cut the foil just long enough so I can tuck it around the back and use a little bit of washi tape to hold it in place. I like to do this because it really holds the foil in place and I have less movement as it goes through the die cut machine. So once my platform is completely heated up, I'll place my foil plate where I want it. I'm going to use the grid lines of the glimmer machine in the background there to make sure it's straight. Then once it's ready, I will place my foiled and inked panel right on top, and then the two clear and thin shim on top of that. Then I remove it from the base and run it through my die cut machine. I'm going to do this again. So I'm going to tape down the foil to the cardstock. This time I'm just using white plain cardstock. So whether you decide to foil first or ink first, I wasn't sure it was going to work, but you'll see that either way works perfectly. So I have the two rectangles, those dotted rectangles, and I'm trying to line up my panel right on top so that it is straight, then put the clear plate and the thin shim on top of that and run it through the die cut machine. Once I remove the washi tape and the foil, you can see that it foiled beautifully on top of the ink and water spritz background. Of course, I waited till everything was 100% dry before I ran it through with the foil. Again, just tape that down and make sure it stays in place. Lay it straight on your hot foil plate and then add your clear plate and thin shim and run it through your die cut machine, trying to hold it in place so nothing shifts. And here you go on the white cardstock. Last but not least, I did want to try it on some pattern paper. So I have a small dotted rectangle, a little piece of foil on a piece of A2 pattern paper that I cut out from the pack, and I'll use the same clear plate and thin shim on top of that. And then check this out. I thought this looked brilliant. So you get those cute little gold dots all around that pattern paper. Next, let's do some stamping. I have Cummerbund ink and I have the Jar Full of Joy, the jar and the jar topper, and I'll stamp those both. And remember, there's dies for everything. There's also a die for the inside of the jar. So I decided to cut that out of the cardstock as well. And then I'm using the jar die to cut out a piece of acetate. I didn't get it to cut all the way through. I didn't use a good enough shim for it, so I just trimmed where I saw the line that was supposed to be cut. Then I'll adhere the acetate to the back of that stamped cardstock jar. Next, I'll trim down that gold foiled cotton candy water spritzed background just outside the edges of that panel die. So it's going to be a little bit smaller than I would normally work with in a background for an A2 card, but I'm using it as almost a piece of pattern paper to layer. So I really liked the way this ended up looking, and look at that foil. It is perfect even though we foiled on top of inking and water spritzing. So really any way you want to do it, whatever order works great. So here I have a couple of the other stamps from the Jar Full of Joy stamp set. And the great thing that I love about so many of the Catherine Pooler design stamps is that they're layering stamps that take advantage of the beautiful colors of inks that they have. So I am using It's a Girl as the background, and then Samba as the top. So it's almost like a orangey red and then a pink. And I think it looks great. It's so much fun for holiday cards. For this circular cookie or candy that's going to be decorated with this little snowflake, I have the Cummerbund, and then I use a darker color on top of that. Again, the star, I'm using Catching Rays, and then there's a little star inside. These almost remind me of those cookies that have either clear candies melted in the center so they look like stained glass. I think those are so pretty, or jelly in the center. So either way, I think these look so much fun as little cookies and candies and treats that are going to go inside the jar. This one is a little marshmallow with a cute little snow person face on it. They also have dies for the sentiments on that stamp set, Noel and Joy. So take out all those dies and cut everything out. Just hold it in place with a little bit of washi tape so that when they go through the die cut machine, they stay still and they don't shift in there, just like the foil doesn't shift going through as well. So once I have all of these little pieces cut out, I can start putting together the rest of this card. I've cut the pattern paper I'm going to use down to 4 by 5 1/4 and matted it on white cardstock. Then I'll take that small foiled and inked and water spritzed piece that we created, and I'll put that right on top. I'm just using adhesive here. I'm not going to pop anything up yet. Next, I have the goodies inside. I'm using a little bit of liquid adhesive behind each of the cookies and candies and other treats. And I'll place the jar with the clear acetate in the center of it onto the card so I can see exactly how much space that I have here. I want to layer things on top of each other. I want everything to look like it is inside the jar, kind of tumbled on top of each other, like it would be inside, say, a cookie jar or a candy jar. Then I'll just put a little bit of liquid adhesive around the edges where the cardstock is and even where the bow lands on the tails there so that I can be sure that this is going to stay stuck down. This is not going to be a shaker card. It's just going to be a clear window card where you can see those goodies inside that jar. And then for the lid, I will put a little bit of foam adhesive behind that. I'll use just a few little white foam squares and then pop that up kind of at an angle so it looks like it's slightly open. I've also popped up the sentiment which says Noel. Now I stamped that in Twilight ink so it would really pop off of the background. And I just absolutely adore how both foil and inking can be combined to create your own unique customized card. For this next card, I'm using the piece of pattern paper that we foiled the small dotted rectangle on top of, and I'll trim it down just so it's outside that dotted rectangle. Again, this is just going to be a layering piece. It's not the full background. It's pretty small for that. So I'll trim down each side until I get it straight and just outside that dotted foiled line so that I can see both the pattern paper and the dotted foiling pretty clearly. This time, I'm ink blending on top of the foil. And sometimes at first it looks like the foil gets dull, but really the foil resists the ink. So all you'll have to do is brush that away at the end. And so this way I can turn those little white stars into pink stars with cotton candy ink. And I love the way they look as white stars, but they also look really cute as pink ones. And I love that gold foiling on the outside. Next, I'll take a piece of pattern paper that I haven't used yet from the pack and cut that down to an A2 size. So this will be my entire background. I also have some of the stamps that I haven't yet used from the Jar Full of Joy stamp set. So there's a little sprig of berries and there's some pine and some other little leaves. I also have the joy sentiment. This time I'll stamp it in color, and then that tiny little star. I decided to stamp the joy again because I felt like I moved it a little bit on the first one. It wasn't 100% clear, and I know you can get them 100% crisp and clear with Catherine Pooler ink, so it was definitely a user error there. Now I'll take all of those dies. As I mentioned, there's a die for every little image on the stamp set, and I'll hold them in place with some washi tape so that I can run them through the die cut machine and have them cut out cleanly around the image that we have stamped. Since this is going to be a much simpler card, I am using some foam squares behind that inked foiled pattern paper piece that we're using for layering. And I thought that little extra bit of dimension will help these small die cut images stand out, even with that colorful background of the pattern paper. So you can see I really used a lot of the lighter colors from the pattern paper for the stamped images, like that light pink and light blue. And then I'll just take a half of a piece of foam square and pop up the little sprigs that I have to use as well. So everything here is popped up, which gives it that little extra bit of dimension and fun and interest on what is just basically a stamped die cut pattern paper foiled card. Super, super simple, but you can see that all those little details come together and make this a really pretty and unique Christmas card. To top it off, I'll use some of the Lapland Sequins, and I'll just use a tiny little dot of liquid adhesive. I'll place a couple on those berries just because they seem to match so perfectly. And that's the other thing. Not only does the pattern paper match the inks within the collection, there are also sequins that match the pattern paper. So everything comes together, everything matches, and it makes it really easy for you to choose colors so that you don't have to wonder if you're choosing a color that's going to go with your pattern paper. I absolutely adore this totally different looking card using the Jar Full of Joy stamps. This time I'm starting with a white piece of cardstock foiled with gold foil, and then I'll ink blend on top of that. So I'm starting here with Catching Rays. I mentioned I like to do a light little hand first, and then we can always go back over it and add more ink. Next, I'll use a little bit of the cotton candy ink, and I'll have that line in between those two colors cross over a little bit so there'll be a blended third color that we're creating. This is really fun to do, and it's even more fun with that foiling on the cardstock. As I mentioned, if your ink is on top of your foil, just dab it with a nice dry cloth, a soft dry cloth, and it will come away and the foil will be left behind. This time I'm using those star dies from the Jar Full of Joy die set, and I'm cutting out a whole bunch of stars. And you can see that some of them have one color, some of them have the crossover between the two colors. And I'll also use that blue piece that we ink blended and splattered with blue ink. I've foiled it with two different rectangles, those dotted rectangles, and I'll cut right outside the outer dotted rectangle so that I have that down to a layerable background. Then I'll cut an A2 piece of a different pattern paper that I haven't used yet. I love those little presents. And next I'll stamp the jar. This time I'm stamping it in Midnight ink, so it'll be that black outline that you're used to seeing with stamps that you stamp and color in, for example. Then I'll take those two jar dies so that it will be just the frame of the jar. Once again, I'll cut out a piece of acetate that is the size of the full jar. This time we are going to create a shaker card. So I want to make sure that I have that acetate glued to the back of the frame of the jar that we die cut and stamped. So I'll use a little bit of liquid glue once again to adhere that outside cardstock piece to that acetate piece, and that will be our shaker window. Now I'm just checking to see that we have enough room for all of these stars inside the jar. So I have my foiled and inked stars, and some of them, like I said, are multicolored, kind of a gradient of color. So I really love to do that type of inking as well, where it blends together, and the Catherine Pooler inks blend beautifully as well, as you can see here between those two colors. So I'll adhere all these stars down. This is going to be inside the jar as well, but there will be pieces that will move around, and then there'll be pieces that stay solid here. I have a thin piece of foam tape that I'm placing right behind the edges of the jars. And it's pretty thick, this foam tape, so it's all I need. I don't have to double it up. This time I'll use the Crater Lake sequins and just pour a bunch over those stars. I'm going to make sure that those are placed in the center of that foiled and inked background. And I'll even add a couple of the Lapland sequins as well, just to pop the color a little bit inside that jar. Next, I'll remove the backings from those foam strips that I used, making sure that each of those strips touch each other at the corners, because you don't want your sequins popping out from the sides the first time your recipient shakes their card. That would be the worst. So again, just shoot those guys into the center a little bit so that you can place that foam tape and the jar right around it. Now they're trapped inside and you can shake like crazy and they won't come out. Next, I'll use some of the ink colors that I used before and some of the images that I used before. I love that bow at the top of the jar. This time I'm using cotton candy ink and It's a Girl ink, so it's two different pinks, but they're just different enough that they can create a really pretty mix of colors on these three images: the bow, the little candy, and the candy stick. So I'll adhere the bow at the top of the jar like usual. I love that. I think it's such a nice touch to the top of that jar. The candy stick is going to be on the outside of the jar, as well as the little candy peppermint. And then I'll stamp Noel, which is my sentiment, in midnight ink. Use the die to cut it out. This time I won't pop this up. I'll just use a little liquid adhesive and it'll go right on the window. And look at that. I love how the stars are there with the inking and the glimmer of the foil, but there's also the sequins on top, so it looks like everything is just tumbling around in there. Thank you so much for stopping by and enjoying this episode of the Crafty Christmas with Catherine and Friends series. I hope you have a wonderful season and enjoy every minute of your holiday card making.
Woo! So much there. So many things happened.
Yes, I absolutely was like, when Rebecca went over that pattern paper with the stars on it and she was ink blending, I was thinking, oh, what is happening here? Loved it. Never thought to do that.
Me either.
I loved how her stars turned like a soft peachy pink and like
gorgeous.
Beautiful.
I love how she foiled and ink blended, foiled on pattern paper. Foil on pattern paper.
Foil on pattern paper.
I couldn't do that for sure.
And then cut the little stars out.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So many great things. So leave a comment. Let us know which technique you're going to use first in your next project.
Yeah. What do you want to try first?
Thank you, Rebecca, for this amazing video. We absolutely loved it. We loved having you here on the channel. And if you are new, I hope you will subscribe so you can hang out with us again.
Yes, and we will see you right back here next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for our next installment of Crafty Christmas.
I can't wait.
With Catherine and Friends.
You guys have a great week. We'll see you again soon.
Bye. That's going to happen. What now?